Have you ever considered that one day, those spooky things the older generation talks about might actually appear before you? In mid-June 2021, Noah, an anthropologist, returned to his work in the Arctic. However, their team, after drilling into a mysterious deposit in the ice, released a large amount of unidentified gas, leading to a collective poisoning crisis. Noah and his partner, Becca, raced to seek help, only to find the Inuit village along their route deserted. As they hid in the village, seeking shelter from a sudden blizzard, a strange creature appeared in their supposedly sealed shelter. This creature was strikingly similar to the shapeshifted creature Igilake from Inuit legend. The thing stopped mocking Becca and me, but remained humanoid, circling us slowly, like a wild animal stalking its prey. At that moment, we were truly as panicked as prey. Becca trembled, asking, "It can make the sounds of all our teammates. How is that possible? What is it?" Noah was also speechless, unable to answer, unable to believe that the creature spoken of by my grandmother Elder Katake actually existed. Unsurprisingly, the thing before us was an Igilake. The Igilake suddenly shifted, its form changing again. Our Eskimo dogs reacted first, rushing in front of Becca and me. Amidst its transformations, the creature let out a wolf howl, gradually turning into an Arctic wolf at least 2 meters tall. Becca then moved to the center of our Eskimo dogs and made a gesture behind him. I immediately understood. He wanted to use the sled dogs to temporarily deter the Igilake, while I secretly retrieved our weapons. My eyes never left the Igilake's constantly changing form, but its body slowly moved towards our luggage, its left hand slowly reaching into the backpack until it found the gun. I yelled at the sled dogs and Becca. The moment they moved, I pulled out the SAC 85 rifle from my backpack, quickly loaded it, and aimed. The Igilake, realizing the situation was dire, lunged at me desperately. I didn't bother aiming, and pulled the trigger. It was too close. No matter where I shot, I would hit it. With a deafening bang, the rifle bullet tore a large chunk of flesh from the Igilake, sending it tumbling to the side. Even after falling, it continued to convulse and change shape, and the separated piece of flesh also kept changing. I recovered from the ringing in my ears and dizziness caused by the gunfire, only to see the Igilake, oozing thick black liquid and emitting the foul odor from the drilling site, trying to get up again. Becca had already roughly ripped off the seals on the front door, yelling, "Run," and pulling me and the sled dogs towards the outside. To be safe, I raised my rifle again and fired at the kerosene barrel beside the Igilake. Another loud bang. The kerosene barrel exploded, sparks scattering in all directions. "Go," Becca yelled again. I shouldered my backpack and rushed into the unrelenting blizzard. Behind us was the growing fire and the Igilake's roars. We climbed onto the sled, the Eskimo dogs pulling us with all their might, running through the white expanse, slowly leaving the ghost village. After identifying the general direction, we urged the sled dogs forward towards the Aurora outpost. Returning to the outpost was important, but escaping the Igilake was even more crucial. After several hours of traveling in the biting cold, we and the sled dogs gradually succumbed to the low temperature and blizzard. At that moment, we arrived at a nearly treeless tundra. Finding a shelter from the blizzard here was not easy. Luckily, because the snowfield had a wide view, we quickly spotted a small snow-covered hill and decided to build a temporary snow shelter there. We shoveled and packed the snow, facing the wind, to build a windbreak and a roof. Following the polar survival methods taught during our training, Becca and I built a small, safe space and hid inside. Due to prolonged exposure to the blizzard, Becca was so cold that his teeth chattered. "Fire. We need to make a fire quickly." I was too weak to speak, nodded, and fumbled for the waterproof matches in my backpack, lighting the barely gathered wood. Finally, a small fire burned between Becca and me. In this moment of crisis, the fire brought not only physical warmth but also spiritual comfort. Looking back from our makeshift snow shelter, the village engulfed in flames from our earlier fight had become a small orange dot in our line of sight. We were very, very far away, but thinking of the Igilake, I still felt uneasy. Becca seemed to sense my tension and started a lighter conversation. "You know what? I can also use a gun. I learned it hunting before." I pulled my head back from outside the snow shelter and asked, "What did you hunt?" He said, "When I was a kid in Newfoundland, my dad took my brother and me to the northern peninsula. We hunted rabbits, grouse, sometimes even moose." I sat closer to Becca, saying, "When you were hunting, I was probably playing baseball in high school." "Really?" Becca smiled in surprise. "You must have been an MVP, winning awards left and right. If there were a most time on the bench award, I definitely have won that, because I spent most of my time sitting on the bench waiting my turn." We sat around the fire, chatting casually, until we were too tired to speak, listening to the crackling of the fire and the howling of the blizzard outside, and slowly closed our eyes. On June 2021, the fire inside the snow shelter continued to burn, and the blizzard outside continued to rage. However, at dawn, some strange sounds woke us. Amid the howling wind, there were crows cawing. I woke up Becca, who was snuggled up next to me, and peeked outside. On the flat snow, 2 crows had appeared, flying low around our shelter. The next scene stunned us both. One of the crows suddenly landed above our snow shelter, opened its beak, but this time it didn't caw. It was a little girl's voice. "Mommy, Mommy, where are you? It's so dark, so dark. I'm so scared." The other crow flapped its wings, continuing to circle low, emitting the voice of a grown woman. "I can't find my child. I can't find Apudai. Apudai." This name seemed to bring all my memories flooding back. There was a mother and daughter in the burned-down village. The mother's name was Nanak, and the daughter's name was Apudai. Could these 2 crows? Before I could think further, Becca tugged on my sleeve, gesturing towards the sky. We saw 3, 4, 10, dozens of crows flying low, circling our snow shelter. Each crow emitted a human voice. Becca shrank back into the snow shelter, asking, "Those are the voices of the villagers, right?" I didn't speak, but slowly reached for my backpack, ready to draw my gun or flee again. The crows flew lower and lower, landing on our roof and in front of us. Becca, increasingly nervous, grabbed my arm, asking, "What's going on? Are these crows also Igilake? What happened to those villagers?" Though my heart rate was terrifyingly high, I did my best to keep calm and said, "In Inuit mythology, Igilake aren't always creatures. They're people who have changed. Those who disrespect the laws of nature are punished, transformed into Igilake. For example, those who slaughter animals indiscriminately, desecrate the dead, or recklessly drill into mountains considered sacred." Becca stared at me, his eyes full of fear. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, if the legend is true, we may have inadvertently released something, some kind of power. I don't know how to explain it. Those leak gases may not just be gases. They might be something much older. This being is turning those who have come into contact with it into Igilake, one by one." Becca seemed even more frightened after hearing this. "So these crows are the villagers. Then the stitched monster in the village. It wasn't imitating the drilling team members. I confirmed his guess. It is the drilling team members. Currently, it seems to be our teammates, fused into a constantly shapeshifted creature." Becca was completely frantic. asking his final question, "Will we also turn into Igilike?" Before I could answer, a crow landed directly in front of us, its beak opening to emit an old man's voice. "Yes. Soon. June 21st. After adjusting our radio equipment countless times in the snow shelter, after 2 days, we finally received a signal from the outpost. Aurora Outpost. This is Noah. Carl. Do you copy?" After a 3-second silence on the radio, Drive Anderson's voice finally came through. "Noah. This is Anderson. We've been trying to contact you. Are you and Becca all right?" I said sarcastically. "Well, we're alive for now, currently in a makeshift snow shelter on the tundra. The blizzard is too strong. I don't know exactly where we are." After confirming the signal was stable, I told Drive Anderson about what happened in the past few days. I could tell he was completely baffled, and only after a long pause did he say, "Oh, I don't know what to say. The base has also been affected, and it's getting worse. We're preparing to evacuate." His answer shocked me. "What about the Inuit village south of the base? Do they know they need to evacuate?" "We're still trying to notify as many villages as possible. A helicopter is scheduled to arrive at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and we will leave Aurora in batches. So you two should come back quickly." I gave Becca a nod, and he nodded in agreement. Then I replied to Anderson, "All right. We understand. The storm is calming down. We'll head back soon. And remember, it's definitely not just toxic gas." There was a pause on the other end of the radio, followed by Drive Anderson's firm reply, "We know. Thank you. Stay safe. Come back quickly." The blizzard did stop 2 hours later, and we began our final journey back to the Aurora Outpost. Along the way, our sled dogs became increasingly bizarre, stopping frequently to bark at the air, their eyes becoming increasingly vacant. This made me very uneasy. A thought increasingly took hold. The entity's influence wasn't limited to humans. Thus, we anxiously hurried back to the outpost. As we approached the base, an unnatural silence struck us. The entire outpost looked like a ghost town, devoid of its usual vitality. The only movement was the slow rising smoke from the storage area. When we entered the outpost and approached the source of the smoke, I saw what I feared most: the snowmobiles and sleds, once neatly parked in the warehouse, were completely destroyed. Becca was holding his gun, his hand gripping it tightly, observing the warehouse, muttering, "Something's wrong." "Noah." "Indeed," I replied, tightening my grip on Kodaka's meteorite black knife, which I still carried. We entered the main building with utmost caution, using the still functioning powerful flashlight from the warehouse. We slowly shone it down the corridor. Then, we saw our colleagues from the base. Their fate was almost identical to the drilling team. Dozens of people, fused into a semi-human, semi-animal entity, constantly changing their appearance, roaring in their original voices. The sight made my stomach churn, and I almost vomited. Becca immediately covered his mouth and recoiled. The next second, we ran in opposite directions without a sound, running frantically until Becca stopped me in the radio room. During our days of frantic escape, we had slowly developed a tacit understanding, so I gripped the knife and walked into the room. This place was also in chaos, dilapidated, with broken wires scattered everywhere, and all electronic equipment smashed to pieces. Occasionally, a gulping sound could be heard. We shone the flashlight for a while before discovering the source of the sound. Drive Anderson. He was slumped against the main radio console, his skin discolored, much of his body swollen, and his clothes soaked, as if he'd just been pulled from the water. He was completely immobile. Only his throat was still trembling as he made a gulping sound. On closer inspection, he was still gripping the microphone tightly, saying, "Stay safe. You two, come back quickly." Becca slowly approached Drive Anderson and gently removed the microphone from his hand, muttering sadly and angrily, "He's been gone for a while. He was luring us back over the radio. There's no helicopter, no rescue team, nothing here. You're right, so we can't be discouraged. We need to leave the outpost immediately." I encouraged Becca, and he slowly pulled himself out of despair, preparing with me to finally leave this place. We searched the still safe areas of the base, taking medical supplies from the medical room, finding the remaining canned food and water in the cafeteria, and obtaining the last of the polar survival equipment from the equipment room: thermal blankets, flares, camping stoves, ice axes, etc. It was time to leave the Aurora outpost. As we navigated the maze-like corridors of the base, I asked a question I had been holding back for a long time. "Becca, why haven't we changed yet? We were exposed to the gas much earlier than many others." Becca walked silently for a while before speaking. "Maybe the gas doesn't affect people based on when they came into contact with it, but how long they've been at the base." I was shocked by this guess and hurriedly asked him what he meant. He explained, "Erica is the most senior employee at the base. That's probably why she was the first to be affected. You're the newest employee, having only arrived last week, so unsurprisingly, you would be the last to be affected." "I see." I hesitated, then asked a more cruel question. "What about you, Becca?" "Me? I've actually been at Aurora for several months." "Several months?" I was startled, because I had always thought he was a new arrival like me. He nodded, replying, "Yes, I'm not new. I've been busy with Lao Han and the others, so I rarely left the lab or interacted with everyone. Everyone thought I was new, but I'm not." He didn't continue, just looked at me pitifully, and I looked back at him. Finally, I sighed, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Who's affected first or last doesn't matter. We'll escape together, right?" He smiled dryly and thanked me. "Thank you, Noah. Let's just escape together." We didn't speak again, leaving Aurora and entering the snow-covered expanse once more. June 22nd. The sled dogs that had accompanied us throughout our escape were our most loyal companions, and our transportation out of this frozen land. However, today, they also began to show strange changes. Their bodies were swollen, their fur falling out, and at times, strange lumps could be seen moving under their skin. Our sled moved erratically, and Becca had to repeatedly check and care for our dogs. Each dog groaned painfully. However, an undeniable fact was before us. If we didn't get rid of them, not only would they suffer, but soon Becca and I would too. The last time we got off the sled, our dogs were completely unable to move normally. Becca sadly knelt in the snow, embracing them and crying, "Noah, I can't let them suffer any longer." I knew what he meant, but I still confirmed again, "Becca, are you sure about this?" He just cried, looking at me, but his expression was full of unwavering determination. I understood, so I offered to help, but he refused. "No, I've been taking care of and raising these dogs. I'll do it." I nodded, said goodbye to each dog that had persevered, looked away, and then heard four gunshots behind me, each echoing for a long time across the ice field. When I looked back, Becca had already taken the luggage off the unusable sled and handed me the map, saying, "We need to travel light, take a shortcut, leave immediately." After studying the route for the morning, we had a preliminary plan, assuming that the small villages in this area had all been affected by the gas and turned into ghost towns. The nearest large human settlement was Utikirvik, 100 miles away, but this distance was too far, so under Becca's suggestion, we might be better off traveling by water. Before coming to Aurora, Becca had worked on an offshore drilling platform not far away. That area often had patrol boats. If we set off from our current position towards the northeastern sea area, We could reach it in 3 to 4 days by traveling 30 miles. His idea was very risky, as we only had an inflatable dinghy, and we didn't know what effect the gas would have on marine life, nor what kind of bad weather we might encounter at sea. Becca could see my hesitation, so he reminded me, "We have no choice. We don't have enough food to reach Utiki or Vic. The sea route is risky, but the chance of survival is higher." I unfolded the map, stared at the small dot representing the drilling platform, and finally gritted my teeth. "Let's go. Let's inflate the dinghy." June 23rd. The two of us sat in the dinghy, like tiny particles in the vast ocean, dwarfed by the towering icebergs in the near and far distance. Yet all our hope was on this tiny particle. We took turns paddling, resting, and keeping watch, moving forward as the day and night changed. The next day, our boat slowly approached a rocky beach, but a sudden downpour drenched us, making us shiver with cold, and our paddles almost slipped from our grasp. As we checked the map to confirm our direction, I noticed Becca's pale face and bluish lips. "Are you okay?" I asked him. He said he was fine, but his chattering teeth betrayed him. It was clear that we needed to warm up quickly and could continue paddling at sea. I started paddling the boat slowly towards the beach, saying, "We need to go ashore and build a fire to warm up." He didn't insist on continuing towards the open sea, as he had lost his willpower due to the cold. We worked together to pull the dinghy onto the beach, found a cave in a low hill, and lit a campfire. The cave wasn't large, but it was sheltered from the wind, and the entrance was wide enough to prevent snow accumulation. It was a perfect resting place. Next, I helped Becca, who was still shivering, remove his wet gloves and boots, discovering that his toes and fingers had turned completely black and blue and were stiff, completely frostbitten. Then I cleaned and bandaged his hands and feet, comforting him as I worked. "Don't worry. It's not too serious. It'll heal quickly." As I spoke, he seemed to lose consciousness due to hypothermia. He started to ask incoherently, "Noah, can you sing me a song?" I can't sing. I'm terrible at it." He looked at me with vacant eyes. "Yes, don't you know Inuit songs?" Looking at Becca in my arms, I couldn't refuse and began to think what to sing. As a child, I would always refuse to go to sleep, and my grandmother would sing me an old Inuit lullaby about the eternal love between the moon and the sea. I cleared my throat. "I really can't sing, but I can recite the lyrics. Will that do?" Then, like a poetry reading, I recited the lyrics, occasionally adding a little remembered melody. The voice echoed in the cave. "The moon shines brightly. The moon watches me deeply." As I sang softly, Becca relaxed, closed his eyes, and his breathing became steadier, falling asleep. That night was long and arduous. I tried my best to stay awake, monitoring Becca's condition closely, afraid that I would lose my last and only partner. But I couldn't stay awake and fell asleep. I awoke in the dim morning, my body stiff from the cold, the fire extinguished, and Becca gone. "Becca, Becca." I quickly drew my gun and flashlight, looking around, except for the echo in the cave. No one answered. I stumbled to my feet, rushed out of the cave, and found a trail of barefoot footprints in the snow, each footprint stained with deep red liquid. Becca's clothes were scattered along the footprints, but all were torn to shreds. I followed his footprints, picking up his clothes along the way, my heart filled with more than just panic. I had learned during training that due to hypothermia, people might enter a confused and disoriented state, experiencing an intense feeling of warmth, which was an illusion. By the time they realized they were in the cold, they were already close to death. Following the footprints along the coastline for several hours, I finally saw Becca on the snowfield. His exposed skin was bluish white, his hair disheveled, crawling on the ground. "Becca," I shouted and rushed towards him. He didn't answer, I didn't turn back, and continued to crawl shakily on the snow. When I got close, I heard him muttering something in fluent Inuktitut. Just days ago, he hadn't known a single Inuktitut word. He mumbled, "The moon shines brightly. The moon watches deeply." Wait, weren't those the lyrics I hummed to him last night? Was he using this to stay conscious? It turned out I was too naive. He suddenly changed his tone, muttering to himself, "Igilake, you came tonight, plunging our home into fear." I summoned my courage and gently turned him to face me, but the sight before me was far worse than I had imagined. Becca, the girl who had fought alongside me, now looked like a frozen corpse, but was being pulled forward by an unknown force. Her eyes were dull, and the tattoos of the ancient mummies we had seen at the drilling site were slowly appearing on her body. At that moment, she was still holding a scalpel. The moment she raised her hand, I thought my body would be defenselessly slashed, but she cut off her own hand. "Stop, Becca," I was desperate and shouted, but it was in vain. Her severed hand fell to the snow, but not a drop of blood flowed. Instead, it began to twist and jump, changing shape, and from her mouth, she continued to murmur those old, valiant folk songs hidden in the snowy mountains. "We can only look from afar." Suddenly, she froze completely, her neck turning sharply. Her thin, skull-like face turned to me, saying, "You're the last one. Join us."